Hello, and welcome to another installment of There You Go with Brian. The year was 1975. The date, February 2nd. The time, 10:45 p.m. The place, the Sunset Strip, Los Angeles, California. Vaughn Greenwood had just purchased some drugs from a local dealer, and while making small talk, he had discovered that the mansion on the hill overlooking the strip belonged to a newly crowned movie star, Burt Reynolds. The dealer told Greenwood that the movie star had just made a film called Deliverance and another flick called The Longest Yard. Oh, sure, this sexy young actor was on the rise. He had money, fame, women, but to Vaughn, it didn't mean Burt Reynolds was any better than him. As a matter of fact, the more Greenwood thought about it, he came to the twisted conclusion that he might have to pay a visit to the movie star's home, if just to show who was the better man. You could say that Vaughn Greenwood had a bad attitude, but he also had a bad history. He was originally from Pennsylvania, but made his way out to Los Angeles in 1964. It was in that year that he took his first life. The victim's name was David Russell, an aging transient. His body was found on the Los Angeles Public Library's front steps with numerous stab wounds. The very next day, police found the body of 67-year-old Benjamin Hornberg. He was killed in the second-floor restroom of his hotel. His throat slashed from ear to ear, and numerous stab wounds marked his head and upper torso. 2 random murders in 2 consecutive days. And then, nothing. Police were baffled, but they needn't have been, for you see, Vaughn Greenwood left L.A. and moved to Chicago. There he met an older homosexual man named Mance Porter. The two lived together and had a romantic relationship, which led to a disagreement, which led to Vaughn Greenwood slicing Porter's throat wide open. Only this time, the victim lived. Greenwood was found guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in an Illinois prison. He served 5.5. While incarcerated, Greenwood spent most of his time in the gym. When he was released, he was 250 pounds of raw serial killer muscle. There's an old saying, a criminal always returns to the scene of his crime, and so was the case for Vaughn Orrin Greenwood. Upon arriving in Los Angeles, on a dark night he attacked a homeless man. The man's name was Charles Jackson. Greenwood slashed the homeless man's throat wide open, and in a strange twist, he left Charles Jackson's corpse on the steps of the public library where he had killed a man just 10 years earlier. Only this time, there was a ring of salt sprinkled around the man's body. A cup was filled halfway with blood. It appeared someone was drinking out of that cup. And the oddest of all, the dead man's shoes were removed and positioned in such a way that they were pointed towards the man's head. Greenwood had committed 2 murders a decade earlier. His killing of Jackson marked the beginning of a killing spree that left 9 men dead in a span of just 2 months. Every time the M.O. was the same, always killed with a large knife, throat slit from ear to ear, and of course, a ring of salt around the body. And the odd display of the victim's shoes. Eventually, the police and local newspapers began to call this man the Skid Row Slasher. Was he a lone maniac, possibly a part of some sadistic cult practicing a sacrifice ritual? Back in Vaughn Greenwood's studio apartment, he prepared himself for a visit to Burt Reynolds' home. At this point, he was a seasoned killer. His preferred weapon of choice was a machete. He took his time waiting for the sun to fall. It gave him time to make the machete razor sharp. Around midnight, Vaughn Greenwood left his apartment. He wrapped his machete in a newspaper and proceeded to walk the 5+ miles from Skid Row to the Sunset Strip. From there, he slipped onto a side street and climbed up a dirt hill, going through trees and bushes to arrive at a fence that bordered the edge of Burt Reynolds' property. Peering through the back windows, Greenwood could see a dim light on. It wouldn't be long. He reached the back door of Reynolds' home, picked up a rock from the garden, and smashed the window. No alarm system. This was going to be easier than he imagined. In his right hand, he held on to his machete with a death grip. With his left, he put it through the broken window and unlocked the kitchen door. He entered. The house was quiet, but the slasher could look through the hallway to the master bedroom where he could clearly see a soft light shining. As he walked down the long hallway, he could see displayed samples of the Western artwork that Burt Reynolds had accumulated in the last 2 years since he had become a star. Entering the bedroom, the slasher looked around. The king-size bed was neatly made. A fish aquarium was against the wall. Oversized pillows and heavy drapery made the room rich and luxurious. The slasher thinks to himself, "This will be the perfect place for me to teach this movie star a lesson." But much to his disappointment, after exploring the house, he finds that Burt Reynolds is not home. At this point, Greenwood decides to wait for the movie star to return. It's after 2:30 a.m. The slasher decides to wait in Reynolds' closet, ensuring that Reynolds will have a bloody surprise in the middle of the night. Surely Reynolds will be home soon. Once inside the closet, Greenwood finds a Mexican poncho and a cowboy hat, a gift to Reynolds from his friend Clint Eastwood. It's the outfit that Clint wore in the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Greenwood puts the outfit on. He waits in the closet for over an hour, but Burt Reynolds never comes. Greenwood becomes impatient and leaves Reynolds home to go up the hill to the neighbor's house. He breaks in the back door and finds two men inside, Clyde Hayes and Kenneth Richer. They were listening to music and drinking wine. It's at this point that Greenwood attacks. Wielding his deadly machete, he starts to inflict damage on the bodies of these two men that in their wildest nightmares they could never imagine. By the second swing of the razor-sharp machete, Hayes lies bloody and dead on the floor. At this point, in a last desperate effort to survive the assault, the scared and confused Richer rushes the slasher, grabbing him around the waist. The slasher inflicts damage on his back with the blade. Both men go crashing through the picture window in the living room. Laying outside in the yard, the slasher swings his machete once more before walking away. It's almost 3 a.m. now. Burt Reynolds finally arrives back at his home. He steps inside, washes up, strips off his clothes, and crawls into bed. He falls asleep immediately. Within 15 minutes, he is awakened by a sound. Someone is in the room with him. He sits up in bed and turns on a small light on the nightstand. He looks down to see the horrific sight of Kenneth Richer crawling on his bedroom floor, having come through the sliding glass windows. He's making a horrible gurgling sound. He's covered in blood. He seems to be asking Burt Reynolds for help. Reynolds grabs the phone to call for the ambulance. It's at this point that he looks through the sliding doors of his bedroom and sees the slasher. The killer is standing not more than 20 feet away from him, still wearing the cowboy hat and poncho, holding the bloody machete in his right hand. Reynolds is frozen with fear. You know the feeling. Your body shuts down. You want to move. You want to scream, but you're paralyzed. All of a sudden, Reynolds jumps off the bed and picks up the phone, hoping he can make the phone call before the slasher rushes him. It's at this point that Reynolds sees the slasher turn and walk away. Within minutes, the Los Angeles police are on the scene. Helicopters are in the air. The ambulance drivers are rushing in to get the bloodied and abused body of Kenneth Richer to the hospital. Miraculously, he survives. The detectives can see that the Skid Row slasher made his getaway down the hill behind Reynolds' home. They even managed to find a small wallet with food stamps inside. Now they know the true identity of the Skid Row slasher. 2 days later, Reynolds receives a phone call. The police have arrested Greenwood and are holding him.
Mr. Reynolds, I know you're busy, but we need you to come down to the station house to positively identify the slasher.
When Reynolds arrives at the police station, he's told that this man, known as the Skid Row slasher, is violent and intimidating. Whatever you do, says the sergeant, don't let him stare you down. Once inside the room with the slasher, Reynolds IDs him as the man who was at his house with the machete. Burt can see that Greenwood is handcuffed, yet as he sits at the table across from him, he seems to be writing something down on a yellow legal pad. all the while staring directly at Reynolds. After Burt IDs the man, he gets up to leave. He turns back to look over his shoulder, and he can see that the legal pad says over and over again, "Kill Burt Reynolds." At his hearing, the slasher was told by the judge that he was a menace to society. Vaughn Greenwood was convicted of 9 counts of murder, and he would receive the maximum penalty for his crimes, 32 years to life. Greenwood spent the rest of his life in prison and died December 18, 2020, at the age of 76 in California's men's colony at San Luis Obispo, California. Burt Reynolds went on to make movies for the next 40 years. As a matter of fact, from 1978 until 1982, Burt Reynolds was the biggest movie star in the world. But that was long after that strange and bloody night in February of 1975, when the movie star met the Skid Row slasher. Thank you so much for joining us for There You Go with Brian. If you'd like to support this channel, please click the Venmo or Patreon link below. We always appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you next time on There You Go with Brian.